pastor at Mill Hall, where it was last year, if you were there. So this is the first time I've actually had the opportunity to share. We're talking about providing a covering for your family. And I realized as people were coming in, we're at a lot of different places in our life. There could be some that are married, aren't married. Those that maybe have been divorced, those that maybe be widowed, those, the spectrum, young kids, teenagers, maybe they're grown, they're out of the house, maybe your children have their own children. I realize that the spectrum is so far reaching, but I believe as God was leading me through the scripture, that there's principles that we all can kind of take from here and learn from and be encouraged from as men of God. When I first started dating my wife, this goes back, probably about 23 years, started dating my wife. And I think we can all understand as those who have gone through that experience, you're passionate. You're passionate at first about that relationship. You're fighting for her love in return. And you know what? We went out on dates. I would buy her flowers. When I wasn't able to be with her, I hate being on the phone, but I would spend hours on the phone just talking to her. Why? Because I was passionate about winning her heart, especially when I got to that point and I felt that this is the one. I was passionate. Here's the thing though, man. What can happen is this. Once we get what we want, we take for granted what we have. You understand that? It's so easy to fall into that trap of taking for granted what we have. We can lose passion of continuing the fight, not only for our wives, but I think it happens for our families. Those that have been there when their children have been born, you're passionate, you're excited in that moment. And it's sad to say, but it can get to the point where we as men can become apathetic. We can lose our enthusiasm, our interest, our concern. It's hard for us to say that, especially within a church. We should be men of God. But you know what? Apathy falls quickly even into our lives. And we lose that passion for our wives, for our families. As you've heard it said, anything worth having is worth fighting for. And really that's what this session is all about, is really just renewing that passion and that fighting spirit for our families, no matter where we are at in our life. In Genesis 3, we read that Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil first. We as men like to point that out, that she ate first. But it wasn't an independent decision. I think we all understand that. Adam was right there, because in Genesis 3, verse 6 tells us, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. He was right there with her the entire time. Adam was right there. Here's the thing, when he should have stepped in, stepped up, done something about it, what did he do? He just passively let her make a choice. He sat back. I believe Adam's original sin was not just eating of the forbidden fruit. I think it was not putting up a fight, not providing that covering for his wife. Because you know what? If you go back to Genesis chapter 2, this was before Eve was ever created. Before God put Adam to sleep and took the rib out of his body and created Eve. Before it had ever happened, that's where God told Adam that he was free to eat from any tree except from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That information was given to Adam, the man, to be the leader in the relationship. And what did he do? He just passively sat by as his wife made a decision. Edmund Burke, a political thinker of the late 1800s, said this: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And that's exactly what Adam did. And that's, I think, a lot of what's happening in our country. There's a lot of good men. There's a lot of good men in this room. There's a lot of good men here at this conference. There's a lot of good men in our churches, in our communities. But we're just passively sitting by and allowing things to happen to our families without putting up a fight. You know, in Adam's indecision, you better believe he made a decision. In his inaction, he acted. And that is, it's a choice that we make to do nothing. Good things don't just happen by default, they happen by design. Those who are in construction understand that. You know, if you're building a house, there's a blueprint, there's a plan, there's a design that goes into it that you follow along with. You're putting things in advance into thought. You're making a choice before you're constructing. And it's a choice that we need to make in our families as well. In order to have a healthy marriage, in order to have a healthy family, in order to provide that covering for our family, we've got to put the time and the work and the effort into it. We can't be apathetic. We can't just sit back. And here's the thing, we can't hope that it happens. And I've been there. Maybe sometimes we become very, scared, just stiff because of the circumstances of our life, and it keeps us from maybe acting or moving, and we can't just hope that it happens. We must work for it. The serpent seduced Eve, and Adam was right there, right beside her. And when confronted by God, what does Adam do? He shifts the blame on her. Genesis 3, the woman you put here with me, she gave me some of the fruit of the tree, and I ate it. He's shifting the responsibility on her, the blame on her. Man, we're the leaders. That's the place that God has provided for us within the home, within the marriage, within the family, for us to lead and to direct, not to shift the blame. But here's the thing, not only did Adam shift the blame on Eve, but did you hear what I said? The woman you put here with me. Adam blames everyone except himself, where the real responsibility lied. And you know what? Real men take responsibility. Even when they realize it wasn't probably all their fault, real men take responsibility and say, you know what, I'm going to make a change. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to work through this. I'm going to give the effort. I mean, you think about it when you watch the NFL, and after a game, a good quarterback takes the blame, don't they? Even though it was the wide receiver that dropped the pass, it was the running back that fumbled that late in the game that caused the other team to clinch the win. Good quarterbacks say, I could have done better. I could have done this. I could have done. They take responsibility, and we need to be the leaders, the men of God that He's called us to be. I would ask you a few questions as we kind of get into this. Do you have a vision for your marriage? We live in a day and age with businesses. It's all about visions. It's all about, having this mission. But do you have a vision for your marriage? I hope you do. Do you have a plan for parenting? Do you have a plan for your family? I would ask, are you actively providing or striving to provide that covering for your family? If your answer to any of those questions is no, then I believe you're playing defense, not offense. You're passively just reacting to life, not being proactive. Being a man of God, I believe, is being on the offense, not on the defense. In Matthew 16:8, we read that Jesus said, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, right? The gates of hell is in a defensive posture. It is the church that is moving forward against it. It's on the offense. And as men of God, we're to be on the offense. We're to be planning. We're to be preparing. We're to be thinking and looking about where there could be, things that could happen in our family, in our marriage, and doing something about it in advance rather than just reacting to it. And sometimes, guess what? We can't always be on top of everything. We do miss things and things slip through the cracks and we find ourselves reacting. So I don't want to get on us too hard. Because I realize that we're human and things happen. But you know what? I think as men, a lot of times we will plan and prepare for a lot of things. But when it comes to our marriage, when it comes to our family and our children, we kind of sit back and we just react and hope that our children don't just go astray. That our marriages don't fall apart. Man, we have to be on the offensive. We're called to do that as men of God. We've got to play an offense with our life, our faith, our marriage, and our family. It's not reacting to life, but it's being proactive. It's what God has called us to. It's our responsibility as men to provide that covering for our families. We cannot pawn off that responsibility to anybody else. And I think the reason that our nation is in the mess that it is men have been pawning it off to the government. They've been pawning it off to the schools. They've been pawning it off to the churches. I was a youth pastor for 16 years, and there were certain times in my ministry that I would have parents come to me, and their child had made some bad choices, and they found themselves in difficult circumstances, and their parents didn't know what to do. And I understand, we as the church are there to partner with them, but did you hear that? We're there to partner with the parents, but they were kind of blaming me. They were blaming the church that their children were going down the wrong path. Here's the thing. We can't put the responsibility on the church. They're there to support and to help. But here's the thing. The church has our children for an hour and a half, maybe 4 hours a week, depending on how many times that they're able to come in. If there's a Sunday morning, if there's a Wednesday night, whatever it may be. We only have so much time. The family is where it starts. And you know what? As men, we are the priest of the household. So the responsibility is on us. We cannot pawn it off to anybody else. And another thing that's happening, men, I think we're pawning it off to our wives. And I understand, raising children takes a team. And we need that. We need that support. But we cannot just pawn it off to them and allow them to make all the choices and all the decisions while we're just emotionally absent. And that's the thing. Many of us as men, we can become emotionally absent. We need to realize that our sons will become like us. Our daughters will marry men like us. It's something to think about. Are you happy with who your sons will become? Are you happy who your daughters will marry? We need to take responsibility. We need to be better at leading our families ultimately to Jesus. That's where it all begins. We can't leave it to chance that our family will beat the odds. We can't. I understand and I realize that in my years of ministry, I've seen people that were sold out, committed to Jesus, and their children made choices, and they're not serving the Lord at this moment. I've seen the opposite happen, where I knew parents that could have cared less about their children, but somehow, some way, that they found their way into a church and they came to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. And you know what? The odds are the odds. We never realize what may or may not happen. But I'm not going to leave it to chance. I'm not going to sit by and just hope. I'm going to give the effort. I'm going to give the time. I'm going to give the energy. And I'm here to tell you, I am not the expert in this area. By far. Because guess what? I even look at my oldest son who's 13 and I realize where I was absent emotionally. And the choices that he's made, and he's found himself in certain areas that has been difficult. And now I'm starting to realize that it was kind of like a wake-up call for me. Hey! You're going to be involved in his life, not just watching him, play baseball or being there when they're watching TV, but you need to be intentional about speaking into his life. So what can we do to provide that covering for our families? There's just a few areas. There's others that could add. I'm sure you have maybe some experiences that you could add. But this is the way God led me. First of all, husbands, love your wives. Husbands, love your wives. Ephesians 5:25. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, There's only one standard for love, and Jesus said it. It's His standard. Now, when I think of the word man, the word love is not what first comes to mind. You think of someone that's tough, a man's man. You know, me, naturally, when I think of a man's man, I think of Cal Ripken. You know, baseball's Iron Man. The record for consecutive games played, 2,632. It was a record that had stood for 56 years for Lou Gehrig. No one ever thought that that record would be broken. Cal Ripken shattered it. And as I look at it today, I can't see how anybody will ever break that record. So when I think of a man, I think of someone that he played through hurt. He played through sickness, but he was willing to go out there and play for the team. I think of Brett Favre. Another one that had a record of consecutive games played, 297. If you include the playoffs, 321. It seems so odd and such a big difference between baseball and football, but I mean, think about that. A quarterback being able to start that many games in a row. I mean, quarterbacks are always getting hurt. Things are happening. These men, by the world's standards, are tough. But neither of them carried a cross to Golgotha and then allowed nails to be driven into his hands and feet. That's tough. That's love. Being a tough guy doesn't mean sticking up for yourself when someone offends you. And that's what a lot of us feel a man is. But a true man sacrifices himself for the sake of others. You see, Jesus is that example of toughness coupled with love. Sacrificing himself for the sake of others. So when God says this, husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church, the bar has been set extremely high. It's something that we strive for, but you know what? We can never attain it. Let's be honest. We can never attain what Jesus has set before us, but it's what we need to be striving for. We need to be fighting for, to love our wives as Christ loved the church. Romans 5, verses 7 and 8. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates His own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's true love. You see, true love is expressed when people least expect it, least deserve it. That was Jesus' love for us. It's sacrificial. True love is not dictated by someone else's performance. We live in a world where you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. We have this conditional love. We find ourselves getting into arguments with our spouse. We get into arguments with our children. We get into arguments with people at work. And in that moment, we no longer like them because of something they've said or something they've done. We have this conditional love, but Jesus loves us no matter what. You can continue to be walking away from Him. You can continue to live your life the way you want to. His love will never change. It will remain the same for you. True love is committed for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health. It's a covenantal love that Jesus has for us. You know, it's easy to love your wife when everything's going good. Let's be honest. We've all been there. Where the love for our wife wasn't there. Maybe our love for our children wasn't there. Why? Because our love tends to be reactive, not proactive. You see, our love needs to be, so many times the world and what society has said is love is all about need seeking. I need to feel love. But true love, real love, the love of God that He wants us to give to our wives is need meeting. If your focus is on getting needs met, you're going to continually be disappointed, I guarantee. I don't care how amazing your wife is. You will be disappointed when it's about seeking to meet your needs. So we need to be need meeting. That's what love is. Husbands, love your wives. Here's the thing. I believe that loving your wife is not only the greatest gift that you can give to your wife. She needs that. She needs to feel secure and she can trust you in your love, that no matter what, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health, for richer, for poor, no matter what comes our way, I'm going to love you. I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to be passionate about you. But not only is that love the greatest gift that you can give to your wife, but loving your wife, did you hear that? Loving your wife, I believe, is one of the greatest gifts that you can give your children. Because when we get in arguments, when we get into fights and we don't agree, and maybe the time we raise our voices and we slam the door and we rush out, in those moments our children look and think, do I have security? Is everything going to be okay? That's a responsibility that our children do not need to worry about. So loving our wife as Christ loves the church is the greatest gift that we can give our children. Those who are married and have children understand how easily our children can vie for the top spot in our lives. And we allow it to happen. We kind of push our spouse aside for the needs of our children. Far too often parents can put the needs of their children above their marriage. The problem with that is what I just said. The greatest gift that you can give your children, one of the greatest gifts, is loving your wife, having a strong marriage. So we help to provide that covering for our family, for our spouse by loving them, but also for our children by loving our spouse. Second thing, fathers, love your children. And we already talked a little bit about that. I'm going to go a little bit deeper. Do you know what the last word that God spoke in the Old Testament was? Malachi chapter 4, verse 6, the last verse. It said, fathers, turn your hearts to your children. Now there's certain translations that will say parents, turn your heart to your children. But you go back to a lot of the original, it does, it speaks of fathers, because I think once again we are the leaders of the house. Fathers, turn your hearts to your children. You know, what is usually saved for last is that which is most important. We save the best for last. This is God's final statement. Think about that. I mean, Walt just told us, you know, the Word of God is inspired by God. He's the author. There was just other people that wrote it down. So the last word that God spoke, and then here's the thing, there was 400 years of silence until Jesus comes on the scene. But that word that He wanted to resonate with the children of Israel, what was it? Fathers, turn your hearts to your children. Let me read the whole verse. It says, His preaching, and if you look to Luke chapter 1, it's speaking of John the Baptist. His preaching will turn the hearts of fathers to their children and the hearts of children to their fathers. Otherwise, I will come and strike the land with a curse. We live in a cursed nation. Whether we want to believe it or not, I love the United States, but we live in a cursed nation, and I think it goes directly according to what this verse says. You know what, fathers, turn your hearts to your children. Children, turn your hearts to your fathers. If not, otherwise, I will come and I will bring a curse on the land. You know, in the late 1950s, and I wasn't alive then, but obviously I still like to watch the reruns of some of the old shows, but there were shows like Father Knows Best, right? Fathers were portrayed in a good light. Today, you're hard-pressed to find a show where the father is portrayed in that way. They're idiots and or absent in most shows today. Why is that? Why? Because the majority of children born in this nation to women under the age of 30 are born out of wedlock. The majority. 40% of children, and I think that statistic is a little low, and I think it just depends where you live and what's going on and maybe the cultural, surrounding all of that, but 40% of children are without a father in their home. It's normal. It's sad, but it's normal today for the father to be absent. And here's the thing. You're here this morning and you're here for a reason and you want something better for your family and for your marriage and for your children and for your grandchildren. But here's the thing, we need to kind of sit and think a moment. Though we may not be physically absent, are we, and I said it already, are we emotionally absent? Are our children living and we're just kind of reacting and responding to what they're doing and what's going on? Are we emotionally absent from the scene? Fathers, we need to turn our hearts back to our children. 1 Timothy 5:8, but those who won't care for their relatives, especially those in their own household, have denied the true faith. Did you hear that? They have denied the true faith. Such people are worse than unbelievers. That's a harsh statement, but it's the reality of God's heart. His heart is for families. You see, raising our children does not start in the schools, doesn't start in the church, it starts in the home. That's where it begins, and we as the leaders of the house need to turn our hearts back to our children. You see, we're to never stop caring and loving for our children. I don't care how young or how old, if they have their own families. Here's the thing, if they respect you or not, we should have an unconditional love for our children. You know, the fathers that will make the most difference in their children's lives are not the ones with the most money, the most toys, the most credentials, the most knowledge. A lot of times we sit and we think, man, I don't know what to do. But the ones that make the most difference are the ones that care the most. You know, a principle that I've strived to live by for quite some time now is that people don't care how much you know until they know you care. And the same is true for our children, our spouses. So many times we want to speak into our children's lives, but we're absent physically, we're absent emotionally. We need to give our time and our energy and our effort, and that will open the door for communication and for them to respect and to respond. And here's the thing, I realize and I understand that won't always be the case. There's always going to be those circumstances that children are still going to choose and still going to do. But we need to do our part. We need to make a difference. We need to care. You know, one of the greatest ways that I believe that we can show that we care is with our time, our effort, and our energy. It's not with our words. Words are important. They're very important. But I think even greater is our time and our energy. We need to be intentional when it comes to spending time with our families. It's not about just time, it's quality time. You know, I've been guilty of coming home from work overwhelmed, stressed, having a bad day, and taking it out on my family. Or maybe coming home with the intention of spending some time with my children, with my wife, to just be there sitting beside them and not really giving my attention to them. You see, it's not just about, managing our time correctly. We can't just give all of our time to our work or to other people. It's not just about managing our time. It's also about, one thing that I've learned over the past year is managing my energy. Because sometimes I will give so much energy to everything else, but when it comes to my family, I just think, well, they'll understand. Dad needs to go to bed early tonight. Dad needs to rest. We've got to manage our energy. We can't give all of our attention, all of our time, all of our energy to everybody else, and then just give our children or our family the leftovers. And I think it's very normal in today's society for that to happen. We need to prioritize our families. Our families need to realize that they are a priority. We need to be intentional about spending time, scheduling time regularly. You might think that's crazy, that's odd. Over the past year, I've started to put on my calendar days, times, blocks of time where I'm going to be spending with my wife. You know what? If you don't plan to have a date with your wife, guess what? It's never going to happen. If you don't plan, if you don't schedule time with your children, I realize we can be taking them to this and to that, dance lessons, sports activities, whatever. We're there, but are we spending quality time with them? Are we taking them aside and really speaking into their life? We need to schedule those times. We feel guilty about saying no to others, But in saying yes to others, we're saying no to our family. So I would encourage you to mark your calendars. Put blocks of time down. And here's the thing. Many times someone will come up to you and say, hey, what are you doing this weekend? And a lot of times our response is, oh, nothing. Because all we were planning on doing is just hanging around the house and spending time with our family. That is not nothing. That is something that is so important. And that's why I think we need to start writing it down, because if I don't write it down, I forget about it. And so I write it down so when someone comes to me and say, hey, what are you doing this weekend? I can say, I have an appointment. I have a date. I have something going on. It's important. We've got to guard that time with our children, with our families. We can't let the urgent outweigh the important. And as men, we are drawn to the urgent. We want to solve problems. We want to help someone out. But the important is our family. I'm not here to say that sometimes things won't happen, that we're going to have to change our schedule and have to go to our children and say, I'm sorry, but there's something going on. I really need to help. But for the most part, I think we fall the wrong way. And we need to kind of help bring the pendulum back towards our families. Fathers, turn your hearts back towards your children. Lastly, and most importantly, as I said, a lot of times the things that we bring up last is what's most important. Live out your faith. A way to provide a covering for our families to live out your faith in Jesus Christ. You see, that's where it all starts. That's where it all begins. It all starts a relationship with Jesus. Without a relationship with Jesus Christ, your relationship with your wife and your children will always be lacking. Always will be lacking. You've got to prioritize that daily. Not just hope that it happens. Not that you just have enough energy to spend some time with God. You have to spend time with God in order to provide that covering for your family. As they say, actions speak louder than words. So we have to live the faith. You better believe that your family is listening to your life. Yeah, they're listening to what you say. But even greater is they're listening to your life. Are your words and your life matching up? And it's not just something that we do on Sunday. It's something that's a daily encounter with our Savior and our Lord. We can't live without it. Our children need to realize that guess what? Daddy depends on somebody. Daddy needs somebody else that's stronger, more knowledgeable than he is. They need to realize that the only one they can truly trust in, that is truly faithful to the end, is Jesus. And we need to model that to them. It is said for many that their view of God is similar to how they see their dad. Every father leaves a mark on their children, whether for the good or for the bad. We're going to leave that mark, and that's an intimidating thought. Because here's the thing, no one can possibly represent God well. We fall short. We can't possibly meet those standards of representing God to our children, because what they think of God is a lot of times what they thought of us. How they see us is how they're going to see God the Father. But you know what, even in our mistakes, we need to realize that God didn't make a mistake when He made you a father. When He gave you the children that you have, sometimes we could think, man, they could have so much better. I felt that. I said that to my wife. Man, my children could have someone so much better. But here's the thing. God looks at us and He said, I didn't make a mistake. You see, I see your personality. I see your strengths. I see your weaknesses. I see the successes and your failures. And here's the thing. These children that are in your care and your responsibility, they're there for a reason. Because I'm going to use who you are to raise them and to make them who I desire them to be. We do fall short. We make mistakes. But realize that God, if we remain faithful and committed to Him and we try our best to strive to just represent God well, that we're going to be doing our part. But as I said, our children still have the choice to make. We need to impact our family for His glory. In Proverbs 13:22, it says, a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. For most men, it's their desire to leave an inheritance. And a lot of times when you think of inheritance, you think of leaving your family financially better off than you were. Property, money comes to mind from the society standards that we live in. You know, if I can just leave my children further along than where I started, then I'm going to give them a running start. But no greater legacy can we leave than living a life of faith in Jesus. Not only teaching with words, but even more importantly, modeling. And that's why Paul writes, I believe, in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. It's something I think we as fathers need to speak to our children, speak to our families. You know what? Follow my example as I'm following the perfect example. Understand that we teach what we know, but we reproduce who we are. That's scary. We know our faults. We know our shortcomings. But you know what? Let me encourage you today, and I believe this is something that really God placed upon my heart and just came out of nowhere. But I think it's really an important point that we need to understand and realize as we walk away, to be encouraged. Because we do see our faults. We do see where we've messed up in the past and where we could have done better. Know this, your identity isn't something that you achieve. Your identity is something that you receive. That's so countercultural. Your identity is not something that you achieve. It's something that you receive. You don't work for your identity. You work from your identity. Let me explain. When Jesus was baptized, He came up out of the water, and what did He hear? A voice from heaven. God the Father saying, this is my Son, whom I love. With Him I am well pleased. Do you realize up to this point, and I think a lot of times we read past it and we just focus on what Jesus was doing, but up to this point, Jesus' ministry had not started. He had not preached a single sermon. He had not cast out any demons. He had not, no miracles had happened as of yet. But in this moment, God the Father gave Jesus His identity. This is my Son. I love Him. I'm pleased in who He is. You see, we don't work for our identity. As followers of Jesus Christ, as sons of God, we work from our identity. Your identity will transform your activity. As fathers, as husbands, as leaders, as men of God, who are we as followers of Jesus Christ? We are sons of the living God. I'm a child of the King. That knowledge in itself should change the way you are as a husband, as a father, as a man. I'm a child of God. So don't be intimidated to invite your family to follow your example as you follow Christ. Don't sit there and think, man, I fall short in so many different areas. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. You're a son of God. You're a follower of His. Follow my example as I follow the perfect example of Jesus Christ. Don't be intimidated by that. And even when you do mess up, transparency is best. Go to your children, go to your spouse, and say, you know what, I'm sorry. I failed. I've fallen short. I messed up. I let you down. I believe they'll respect us even more because of it. You see, it's not about perfection. It's about who you're becoming in the process. And with you being here today, that tells me that you're concerned about growing in that process. That this is important to you. That you're not apathetic. That you're not going to just be happy to chance or the odds. That you're going to do something about it because you're here. It's as we daily walk with Jesus the more of Jesus others will see in us. And as I said, it's not just about living a certain life at church and then something else at home. It's about being consistent. We mess up, but being consistent, not perfection. It's about who we are becoming in the process. It's that daily process. It's an ongoing process. Because here's the thing. This is what it comes down to. Before you can provide a covering for your family, before you can impact your children, impact your wives in the way that God desires you to impact them, you need to be impacted by Him. And it's not a one-time deal. It's a daily, ongoing process. I like to share it this way. When I first started dating my wife, and when I was younger, we would go out on dates, and I'd throw out all the stops. We'd go to McDonald's. And here's the thing, she would order what she wanted, and I ordered what I wanted, and all the time, and still to this day, many times, and times have changed, but she'll always say, well, can we share some fries? Because I don't want a lot of fries, and you know what? I'm selfish about my fries. I love fries. And you know what? I say, no, get your own fries. I want my fries. I'm getting a large fry because I want a large fry. Yeah, well, I just want a few. Well, get a small fry. Get a kid's fry. I didn't want to share my fries. But you know what? And my children do the same thing. Even my youngest one. Can I have some of your fries? No, get your own fries. But here's the thing. Once I have my fill, then I am open to share. The same is true in our spiritual lives. The reason we're not impacting our families the way that we need to is because we're empty, men. We're empty. We're in some ways, maybe we're living a lie. We're on the outside trying to show that we're a man of God, but on the inside we're hungry and we're empty and we're not filling ourselves with the goodness of Jesus Christ. On a daily basis. We're not getting into His Word. Here's the thing. You cannot lead your family further than where you are in your relationship with Jesus. And many of us, we've hit a wall. And we think, why can't we go any further? Because you haven't stepped further. You haven't gone deeper in your relationship with Jesus. And He's challenging you today. He's challenging you today. He says, go deeper. Go deeper in me. I thank God for that main session that we had, because that helped me to go a little deeper. You see, every day, take another step further in your relationship with Jesus Christ. We can never become content with where we're at because none of us have ever reached the pinnacle. It's a continual process of striving to try to reach that high bar that Jesus has set. But it's being willing to fight for it. Not just sitting idly by and leaving our families to chance. We've got to put in the effort. We've got to put in the time. We've got to show that we love. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank You for the men that are here and the challenge that You have put into their hearts. Lord, I believe what You have begun, whether it has been today or something that has happened 6 months ago, but I believe You'll bring it to a completion. You will continue to work in them and to make them the man, the husband, the father that You have ordained them to be. Lord, but we're going to start with our relationship with You. Because without a relationship with You, our relationships with others will never be what they need to be. Lord, I pray that we would fall in love with You again. Fall in love with You again. Hunger for You again. Desire more of You again. So that we can be the man of God that You call us to be. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.